Activation warning. This episode contains explicit and graphic descriptions of suicide, self-harm, sexual assault, and rape. Discretionary caution and action is required. This episode is not for children. Please use extreme self-care in listening to this episode and seek immediate help through the National Suicide Hotline by dialing 988 if you are emotionally activated or triggered by the content of this episode. Or if you are activated and need help from the National Sexual Assault Telephone Hotline, call 1-800-656-HOPE. That's 1-800-656-4673.
I would get death threats at school. I didn't go to school for my own safety. I knew he had bought a knife for me. He told somebody I knew and sent them a picture of it. So I didn't feel safe at school. I would ditch all of the time, and people thought it was because I was a bad student, but it was because I feared for my life.
Welcome, and thank you for joining me for another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast, coming to you from the Podvlog studio in St. George, Utah, and produced by Markel Consulting, LLC. I'm your host, Dave Markel. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. I'm thankful that you're here. This is episode 79. And you're in for an extremely powerful episode told by this week's guest, Ray Epstein. After all that Ray has been through, it is absolutely amazing that she is able to be a part of this podcast and to tell her survival story. Once you hear her horrific account of coerced self-mutilation, death threats that she endured, violent sexual assault and rape, and the disbelief by other students, teachers, and administrators when she found the courage to report what she was enduring, you'll understand exactly what I'm talking about. But not only is she able and willing to tell her story, she is the founder of Student Activists Against Sexual Assault, SASA, on the campus of Temple University. She's a successful student, and she's a campus ambassador and avid supporter of Callisto. After you hear Ray's story, you'll be captivated by her strength, resilience, and persistence, and you'll want to share this episode with others. She and I both hope that you do just that. So let's get to it. You won't want to miss any part of this powerful survivor story. Here's Ray. Ray Epstein, welcome to Sexual Assault Survivor Stories. I'm glad you're here. Thanks for being willing to do this.
Thank you for having me.
It's an honor. And for my audience, I found a post that Ray did on LinkedIn about Callisto. And having just recently interviewed Tracy D. Tomasi, the CEO of Callisto, and finding out about it and being a fan of Callisto, when Ray posted what she posted, it caught my eye. And I reached out to her and asked her if she would tell me more about what she's doing, because it had something to do with what she's doing at Temple University, where she's a student. Ray, I'm going to ask you to tell us about that organization that you founded, right?
Yeah. I got involved in Callisto after starting my own student organization here at Temple University called Student Activists Against Sexual Assault, which is a chapter of It's On Us, a national organization. And we're also an affiliate chapter of Take Back the Night Foundation.
How long ago did you start that?
In the fall of 2021, I was a freshman at Temple, and I was actively seeking an organization to join. I figured it was a college campus, and there should be an anti-sexual assault club on that campus. I had researched Temple's website, seen the student organizations that were active. Student Activists Against Sexual Assault, or SASA, was one of them. So I did 3 laps at our student activities fair called Temple Fest in the fall, so my first week after moving in, and I couldn't find them anywhere. So I emailed the listed advisor, and I found out the organization had been defunct for the last 5 years, which just felt unacceptable to me. And I've been involved in sexual assault advocacy work for a long time, which I'm sure we'll get into later.
Sure.
But I felt that it was my obligation to restart that organization since it was clear no one else was. So I spent the better part of my freshman year doing that, and we became an active organization in the fall of 2022.
I just find that so commendable and awesome. I think it's great that you did that. But we did a pre-show conversation, and you talked a lot about some experience that you had growing up and why you're such an activist against sexual assault. Ray, what are you able to tell us about your sexual assault experience?
Yeah, so I talk about it pretty frequently, so it's not too difficult for me to express now. When I was in middle school, it was a very small school with a class size of about 20 in each grade. I was the second year of a middle school installment to a pre-primary through elementary school. So the people who were teaching me, the people who were guidance counselors, had been trained for early elementary ed at best. So they really weren't experienced or equipped to be dealing with middle schoolers, which is really the context for where everything went wrong in the aftermath of me being assaulted. But I knew everybody in my grade since I was 2 years old. So it was like a family. It was weird for people to have crushes on each other since we were so connected to each other for so long.
Yeah.
But someone transferred into my class in 7th grade, and everyone flocked to this person because they were new and shiny and exciting. And I was not very well liked. I was at the bottom of the food chain in my very small class. It still was cliquey somehow for how tiny it was, even if we all interacted with each other. So I did not expect to be noticed by this person, but I was. And we became pretty private friends. We were not interacting much in public, but we were texting frequently. He wouldn't really acknowledge me at school. So there was already this weird imbalance between us. But he would pretty brutally self-harm himself. And he told me that the only people he could connect with were people that did that too. And he would try to start convincing me to do the same and convincing me that I had some demons inside of me that I needed to cut out. And he just conditioned me for months and months to believe that the only way that he would like me was for me to hurt myself. And I feel ashamed to admit that I gave into that, but I also recognize that I was a 13-year-old kid. And I also recognize that he was. And he had transferred in from a very different school experience, a public school that was much larger, where he was, as he claims, expelled for knife fighting. I know he was expelled. I don't know if that's the truth about why he was expelled. I wouldn't be surprised, given how violent he was. But he convinced me to start harming myself. He would ask me to send pictures. When the pictures weren't gruesome enough, he would tell me they needed to be bloodier for him to continue speaking to me. It was just a very terrible relationship, and it was platonic for the most part at that point. I had a large child crush on him, and I thought he didn't have one on me. And one day he passed me a note, like middle schoolers do, and we started dating. We kissed on a school trip, and I remember somebody filmed it, which later I'll get back to that. But our relationship escalated pretty violently. It started off with we would walk home together from school to the metro. I live in DC, or I'm from there. And we would take the metro home from school together. And he would find whatever car was empty on the train. It was a pretty big train. And he would force me to give him a hand job on the way home from school when I was completely uncomfortable with that. And I had very little sex education at this point. I knew people had sex to have babies. I knew people who were under 16 didn't have sex to my understanding. Just based off how I was raised. And all of this was completely new to me. I didn't really understand what came before sex and what was in between kissing and sex and what foreplay was. So it was all very new and confusing and upsetting to me. I resisted it at first, and then he would either threaten to break up with me, threaten that no one would love me, or threaten to kill himself, which I believed because of the self-harm. And when I did resist, he would go home and he would send me pictures of his hand with a pile of pills in them and say goodbye forever. You did this. And then I wouldn't hear from him for days if it was a weekend, to the point where even one time I had to have my mom call his because I really thought he was dead. And it turns out he had been playing video games and board games with his family that whole entire time that he had been texting me. So it was very clear there was a lot of manipulation going on. Again, though I do recognize he was a child at the time. And I knew from him that he was being abused by his father, which is something that I also recognize playing into this now.
Yeah.
It escalated from the hand jobs. He came over to my house once after field day, which was right before summer before 8th grade. And it got much more intense and much more violent. And he almost had sex with me fully again. I still didn't recognize what exactly was wrong about what was happening because I hadn't had an education on sexual violence at that age yet.
Yeah.
I knew what rape was vaguely, but I knew I hadn't been raped. So unless it was digitally, with fingers, but I didn't know what that was. So I was very confused about why I was feeling so disturbed and upset. And I had this weird forced depression that was starting to materialize and become real because feelings were actually taking place that were really upsetting and not ones that he was forcing me to have for his sake. And it was just very confusing. And over the summer, I had some distance from him and I wanted to break up with him. I didn't really understand why. I think I just realized people would like me because I went to summer camp and I realized people exist outside of this bubble of 20 people that I grew up in.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized I would be okay if I was alone as a 13-year-old, as crazy as that is to say. So I broke up with him by text. He sent me another picture of him holding pills. That was another mess. That was resolved again with our moms communicating. But right before 8th grade started, I got a message from him on some social media app. The only one I hadn't blocked him on. It's called Tumblr. And he said, if I ever see you again, I'll kill you. And I really, really believed him.
Yeah.
He was a violent person. I knew that and I understood that. To my knowledge, he was a drug dealer. I knew he was in dark things and involved in dark stuff. So I really did believe him. I met with my principal before returning to school saying I got this message. They said they couldn't separate us from classes because they were skill-based and there were only 20 of us. So they can't just create a whole new class. So we had to be next to each other. We had similar last names, so we were smack next to each other in every class, really. I come back to school for the first day and I see him and something in my body just recognizes how wrong everything was. It all just it felt like a cartoon moment when a piano falls out of a window onto you. My knees completely buckled and I actually fell. It was really dramatic. I didn't understand why. None of my classmates did because they're also 13 and 12. I'm one of the oldest in my grade. So most of them are 12 years old. And none of us have any idea what's going on. Everyone just thinks I'm being dramatic. I think I'm being dramatic. I remember I literally started crawling away and got up to run and I ran into the woman's room. And I looked over my shoulder and I saw his eyes and something in my body just completely snapped. And I was sitting in the restroom and I was texting a therapist I had at the time. And my therapist was questioning me and she said, does this have to do with a boy? And I said, I think so. And then she started pushing and I started telling her about what happened as she questioned me. And she told me I needed to go to my principal's office right then. So I got out of the bathroom and I ran out of the room so I wouldn't have to see him. And I ran down the stairs into my principal's office. My principal was my family's neighbor for probably over a decade. We knew him very well. He was, I would say, a family friend and somebody who taught my brother before he was the principal. We were very close. I felt very comfortable with him. I go in the room and I tell him what happened and he says, I don't believe you. And it was just complete disbelief about everything that happened to me from the very beginning. And he says he's going to call my mom and he wants me to go talk to the guidance counselor while I wait for him to call my mom. And I go to the guidance counselor's office and I guess she's being briefed outside of the room. And when she comes back in the room, she says, well, did you ever hold his hand? And I said, yes. And she said, do you know what consent is? And I said, yeah, I know what consent is. And she said, well, did you ask every time you held his hand? And I said, well, he's my boyfriend. I didn't ask every time I held his hand. She said, well, he could turn around and say that was assault too. So you might want to be careful what you accuse people of.
Wow.
And this woman was, the elementary school guidance counselor before. And not that she would have handled things in elementary school better, in my opinion, but she wasn't equipped for this. No one was prepared for classmate on a classmate assault because it just wasn't the level they were trained for.
Right.
But I still think she's responsible for her actions. She's an adult and no person should ever say that to another person. It really shaped the way that my trauma response formed, I think. the first people I told, besides my therapist, which was over a phone, disbelieved me. And I always felt like questioning of everything that happens to me. I still, to this day, I write down everything that happened to me every single day at the end of the day so that I can go back and I can believe myself. And I have to go through it. It was, it was just those two people. And then it was everybody else that I told, all of my teachers, and my teachers retaliating against me because they all loved this golden new boy. My classmates too, who were, even if I thought I was on the bottom of this food chain, my family, he was eventually suspended for talking about this stuff. He's supposed to have a gag rule, and I was also supposed to have a gag rule. So neither of us were allowed to talk about the situation with anybody, but he kept talking about it very publicly. And one of my only remaining friends told the principal, so he was suspended. And then I was suspended because two sixth graders told my principal I was dealing drugs, who both very clearly had a crush on the boy. I wasn't dealing drugs, but I was suspended. I wasn't allowed on our field trip. On the field trips I was allowed on, I was uninvited because they said they couldn't separate me and him. It would have to be me to stay home. I couldn't physically be near him. My physical reactions to him and my PTSD really manifested in a physical way. So I really couldn't be near him. I would just be breaking down every single day at school. Eventually, he was supposed to be expelled and then asked to leave so it wouldn't be on his record. And I come back to school the next day and my classmates are all having a vigil for him. And my teachers are in the hallway watching and smirking, and they don't care. I mean, they're watching, they're not stopping it. They all put a drawing of a headstone on his locker, and they were writing messages of, I miss you, and fuck Ray, and all of these horrible things about me. Instagram accounts were created about what a liar I was. The bio would say, send instances of Ray lying. At the time, I went by Rachel. It just was relentless, and it kept building and building. And then my school agreed with my mom, and my mom agreed because it was such a hostile environment for me to finish the year from home. I wasn't allowed to attend my graduation at a private school that I had been attending and paying tuition for since I was 2 years old, that my brother had attended since he was 2 through 6th grade before there was a middle school. And my family friend was the one who told me I couldn't come. And it was just unbelievable to watch this institutional betrayal at such a formative age. It was so confusing. It was so disappointing. My mom didn't want to let that break me. So in my time finishing the year from home, where I had basically nothing to do, she told me that this nonprofit organization called Break the Cycle on Capitol Hill, which is an anti-teen dating violence organization, was hiring interns. And I started working there as an 8th grader when I was 14. And it was just a completely transformative experience. And I truly, until I started working there, I thought I was completely alone. I thought this never happened to anybody else. This isn't a thing. And I realized every single person in that building it happened to too, in some capacity. Mm-hmm. And it was a really, again, transformative experience for me to be around all of these women and men who had experienced something similar, who were telling me at, again, such a formative age that I wasn't alone. And my mom was also very helpful. She's a domestic violence lawyer, so I was very lucky to grow up with somebody like her who could empower me and know all the right things to say.
Sure. That's amazing.
It didn't end there, unfortunately. I decided I wanted to go to public school and have a gigantic change for high school so I could really get away from everything. And a week before high school starts, I find out that my abuser moved into my school district and will be attending the school. And at freshman orientation, I see somebody pointing at me. And, I turn around because it's in my peripheral and I realize it's him. And I know he's telling his orientation group who I am. And I know he's telling them something about me that's not true. And that I said something about him that's not true. When it was, I felt like I broke again. And it got so much worse. By the end of freshman orientation, my Instagram inbox was just flooded with all of these messages. Why would you ruin this guy's life? Why are you lying? Liar, stuff like that. Until 2 years ago, which is my freshman year of college, I was getting prank phone calls about this still, which is just unbelievable. Yeah. Truly, that people in college still are channeling their energy towards this and still not believing me. I wasn't allowed to join school clubs. My first week of school, I tried to join a lit mag. I walk into the room, the president runs over to me and she says, "You can't be here. We don't let liars in this club." And then my sophomore year, I tried to join the anti-sexual assault club my school started. And the president tells me being there discredits real victims and their experiences. So I can't be in that club.
Wow.
And it was just, I would get death threats at school. I didn't go to school for my own safety. I knew he had bought a knife for me. He told somebody I knew and sent them a picture of it. So I didn't feel safe at school. I would ditch all of the time, and people thought it was because I was a bad student, but it was because I feared for my life.
Sure.
And my junior year, I couldn't take it anymore, and I transferred schools, which was a blessing. I loved my new school. COVID happened, obviously, which was unfortunate. Then I got to college. So I had this weird dual life going on in high school where I was doing all this advocacy work outside of high school and all of this good. But at my high school, I was known for it in a really negative light, and it wasn't being rewarded. It was honestly fuel to people's hatred against me. They were like, how could you do all this work when there were real victims out there? It wasn't connecting for people. And again, everyone was a child, and I assume most of them, and I hope for most of them for their sake that they know better now, but it wasn't connecting for most people in my life. And that was really upsetting. But it was fuel for me in the end. So I mean, in a way, there's this survivor glass half full perspective that a lot of people don't like about how everything happens for a reason. But I really believe that, because this is where I'm supposed to be, and this is what I'm supposed to be doing, and I wouldn't have gotten there without it. So I'm not grateful for it being a problem in the world. It shouldn't be, but I'm grateful that I am where I am.
Ray, let me just start by saying I am so terribly sorry for the experiences that you've had that even brings us together on this show. But
thank you.
I am also so filled with gratitude that you are able to talk about it, that you've healed enough to the point where you can tell your story in such a public way on this platform is so impressive to me.
Thank you.
This is one of the most horrific emotionally assaultive and physically assaultive and sexually assaultive experiences that I think I've ever heard. And I've been doing this since 1983. I have a lot of experience with this type of thing, but the level to which this person went to torment you and cause you the type of emotional distress that you went through is just mind-boggling.
Yeah.
I don't want to sound surprised, because it doesn't surprise me. It just, I think more than anything, agitates me. Not only that he did it, but also that there were so many people who took his side and not yours and didn't believe you. That is shocking to me.
It really was unbelievable. You know, my high school, I was still having this physical reaction to being around him. You have AP testing in high school. You have SAT testing. You have pre-SAT testing. That's mandatory by state. We also had state testing. Our last names were next to each other, and we'd have to be next to each other. And every single test, my mom and I would meet with 3 different people: my principal, my guidance counselor, and the person in charge of all of the test proctors. And every single time they said, we can't switch his testing group to the end of the alphabet. You can switch yours. I didn't want to be the person to move. I felt adamant about that. And they said the only other thing they could do was they could make sure we are diagonally furthest across from the room that we can be. And every single time that I walked into the testing room, he was right next to me. They never, ever followed through.
Wow.
And it happened six times before I transferred. The last time, it was during an AP test, and I ran out of the room because I was having a terrible panic attack. And I was in the bathroom, and I was on Xanax. I had prescription Xanax for tests because my therapist and my mom knew that they would let us down at that point. This was the 7th time during my AP history exam. And I was in the bathroom. I am out of it because I'm on Xanax a little bit. I'm out of it. I'm a little slumped over, I guess. I'm also just having a panic attack. And the proctor runs after me after about 10 minutes of me being out of the room and starts screaming at me. And then when I lift my head, they say, "You're high?" And they start accusing me of doing drugs because I look like I'm on drugs, I guess. And someone else is in the room while they're screaming at me. And I wait for the other person to leave the room before I say anything. And this is a proctor that I know very well. They're one of my teachers, so they knew my situation. And I say when the other person finishes drying their hands and leaves the bathroom, "You put him next to me. You put him next to me." And the teacher is just yelling at me. They're like, "What do you mean? Like, what are you talking about? You're making excuses." And I say, "You put him next to me." And I'm just like through tears. And my teacher finally realizes what they did for the seventh time because they've been there for every exam. And my teacher says, "Oh my God." And then my teacher sits down next to me on the floor and starts sobbing. And I have to be the one to comfort my teacher. And it took me a really long time to realize how messed up that was.
Yeah.
I'm an empathetic person. I felt for them because they were upset, they were remorseful. But it was so wrong that I was 16 and comforting this person.
Yeah.
And then the teacher says, "I'm going to get your stuff and you can leave, but you can't tell anybody what I did." And then we shake on it because they're not allowed to let you leave. But they also messed up really badly.
Yeah.
So my teacher sneaks me out against the rules, against AP testing, in exchange for my silence again. It was just this infinite cycle of gagging me and me having to keep suffering at adults' incompetence.
Incompetence is such a light term for what was done to you. Ray, what intrigues me about all of this is that you survived it. It's horrific. It's horrendous. And yet, look where you are and look what you're doing at this moment. Have you ever been on a podcast before?
Yes, I have.
Okay.
Dear Katie.
That's awesome. So you have a feel for what will come after we're done talking, because there's always this flood of memories, and we've brought everything up to the surface in you telling your story. And there's that same frustration. I'm sure you're feeling it now, and anguish and confusion and pain. While some of that may be resolved, the feelings are felt for the rest of your life on these things.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Help me and my audience understand the perspective of you mentioning that you were taking care of adults and you were already busy taking care of yourself. I'm just amazed that you had the capacity to continue that empathic part of yourself and extend that out to those around you who were actually doing you more harm. I talk a lot on this show about being trauma informed and what trauma does to the brain and to the mind. Tell me about your background with knowing what trauma does.
I would say I'm pretty well informed about hyperarousal and how it affects witness credibility, but also just how it affects a person and how it manifests in people who are traumatized.
Because you lived it.
Yeah. But also I do study this a little bit. Okay. I wouldn't say I'm necessarily going to pass a quiz on the neurobiology of it, but
I think my question goes to the aspect of your life when you were enduring all of this. How did it feel to you in your mind, in your body, when you weren't around him, when you weren't at school, when you weren't dealing with texts back and forth? What was your coping mechanism and what was your thought process about your life in general with all of that going on?
I don't really know how I coped, to be honest. I don't really know how I lived through that. I think I just prayed that time would pass, and it did. But it definitely wasn't easy. Life back then is very blurry for me to reflect on because I was so hyper aroused all of the time. I mean, most of my day, I was seeing him, and it felt like my brain was on fire. I felt crazy all of the time, and I really felt on fire. I felt like my skin was so prickly. I really don't know how I survived it, to be honest. I think it was the stuff that I was doing outside of school that kept me going. But I think the advocacy I was doing came from a place of anger, which isn't sustainable. Yeah. And it came from me wanting this to never happen again, and that's important. But I was furious, and I was just so resentful towards everybody. And I was not as kind as I wish I had been to everybody in my life. I don't really know how I coped with it. I didn't do it well. I mean, not that that's expected. I don't think anyone would deal with it very well. But I was taking Xanax pretty frequently. I got very into smoking weed. It was very helpful for me, honestly. I found it almost medicinal. I mean, it was probably not to my parents' amusement, but I really couldn't function. most of the time. And when I was at home, I was just terrified to go back to school. And I lived about 2 blocks away from my high school. So if I wanted to go to the grocery store, if I wanted to go get a Slurpee at 7-Eleven, I would see his friends or I would see him. And it got to the point that I was so triggered by anybody from my high school. It felt like everything I associated with him became associated with every single teenager around me because I knew they would bring it up, or it felt like they would because so many of them would. It was like I had a phobia of people almost who were outside of my house.
Mm-hmm.
Like I would leave my house, I would see a teenager, maybe I didn't even know them, but I would assume they went to my high school. And I would be absolutely terrified. And it would feel like I was looking at him almost. So I really don't know how I dealt with it. I think transferring schools was necessary. I don't know where I would be if I'd stayed there.
Yeah.
Although when I did transfer, it felt like I was forfeiting almost, and I was losing because I wasn't getting to graduate from the place that I went and I decided to go to again for the second time. And still part of me feels a little resentful about that, but I was unhappy there. So I shouldn't have been there. No one there was nice to me. So it wasn't just him at that point. It was, I just associated all of my trauma with him, with every single person around me. And I still do. I get freaked out when I see teenagers when I'm home. It's like they never aged for me.
Yeah. Ray, when all this was going on, are you able to remember at all what you did to calm yourself enough to even go to sleep at night?
I didn't calm myself. I was really not okay for a really long time. And the only time I felt a little bit of relief was when I was at Break the Cycle or at an event doing work for them. That was the only time I felt okay. And that's, a big reason why I do what I do now. Although, again, I really tried to change my reasoning for doing what I do, because from a place of anger is not sustainable. And I don't think it's activism for the right reasons in the long term. I don't think it works that way. I don't think it can continue to function. And I have worked to change it. And now it's from a place of more academic interest. And I've dug into this and I've learned about perpetrator empathy and hurt people hurting people, which is the big reason I've been able to move on a little bit from this. But I was so not okay for so long. And I don't know how I survived that. I couldn't tell you. I didn't have a way of calming myself down. I was in therapy and I had a mantra, like I would breathe to I am okay, I can still breathe, but it didn't work. I was in this fight or flight mode 100% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think where that really turned around for me, it wasn't when I transferred schools, although that helped a little bit. When I was a senior in high school, right before I graduated, my PTSD started really elevating again. Post-COVID, as we were kind of transitioning back into being around people, I think being around people really started to irritate me again. And I got a stellate ganglion block shot, which was still pretty experimental at the time, but it's an injection in 2 points in your neck into what they call the fight or flight nerve. And it's a nerve block and it resets your fight or flight. And that was where I found relief. So it was really a physical solution and not anything I could work through.
Tell me what it was called again.
A stellate ganglion block, SGB shot. They're amazing. Yeah, it's very expensive. They were originally just made for veterans. So if you're a veteran, you can get it covered. But now they're doing it on people with all kinds of PTSD. It's really incredible, but it's still not covered by insurance. But my parents were, I think, really terrified to send me to college in the state that I was in.
And I was going to go there. I know you said that you were never okay and that the height of the fear response, that fear cascade was all the time going on. But you mentioned your mom being somewhat of a support system. Can you describe for us what that relationship was like and how much was she aware of in terms of the intensity and severity of all that was going on from him?
Yeah, she's my hero. She knew not to involve the police because she knew how rarely that worked out. And I'm really glad she didn't. I think that would have been 10 times more traumatic and it would have been in the news. And I don't know how I would recovered from that. She knew that wasn't the right decision for a 13-year-old. And maybe it was for somebody else, but she knew it wasn't for me. And I agree with her. So I'm glad that I had somebody who was really informed on how those processes tend to work out. In the long term, that's not great how it turns out not in favor of survivors most of the time. But I'm glad that she knew that, because she knew that that would have probably been a bad path for me. There was evidence of threats, but, people can record being assaulted and it still doesn't work out. So I'm really glad that I had her, and she was advocating for me with my principal and with my vice principal and with my teachers. And she was there with me at every single meeting with all of my test proctors. And she was furious every time they let us down. It was like she would burst down a door and she would, I thought, put them in their place, and it felt like it, but they still wouldn't respond with their actions in the ways that they should have. And she was great. I really don't know how anyone could get through what I went through without someone like my mom. I think that's really the only reason I was able to, is my mom knew what to say. My mom knew what I needed. And at the same time, I was I was going through that kind of preteen to teenager transition where, we're very agitated and irritable. So at the same time as all of this happening and me meeting my mom, I wanted to push her away. It was mixed, but she was just very valiant.
I'm in admiration of her. I feel much appreciation for her. She sounds amazing. I'm really thankful for you that she was in the field that she was in. Her knowledge, her background, and the fact that she was a lawyer and dealt with the trauma of interpersonal violence on the level that she did, I think, like you said, was probably life-saving for you.
Definitely.
And that's awesome. I'm really glad for you that you had that. Was there anyone else in your life, in your peer group at all, that did believe you, that had any support for you?
Not until my sophomore year of high school. Even my friend group in high school, even though it was small, I did have a friend group. None of them believed me, and they made it very clear to me. They were my friends despite me lying. It was a very unreal friendship. In my sophomore year of high school, I was taking chemistry, and at my high school, upperclassmen were TAs, teachers assistants, for lowerclassmen. So a senior was in my class, and I was doing terrible in school in every subject because I was missing school most of the time for all of the reasons that we've discussed. Especially chemistry, though, I was always worse at math and science than I was at history and English. So I was really falling behind. I needed help. I was always talking to our TA, getting help. And he confronted is not the right word, but for lack of a better word, confronted me about all the rumors about me in a positive way and said, I would really like to hear like your side of the story, which no one had ever asked me. Everyone had just assumed, oh, she's the girl that lied and tried to ruin this guy's life, and you should stay away from her because you don't want him to do that to you. He told me before I even said anything, he said, I believe you. And I had never heard those words from anybody except my mom. I don't think anybody had gone out of their way to tell me that. Even if they maybe did believe me, I don't think anyone had said it. And those words are, I think, the most powerful ones you can hear when you're victimized.
I think so too.
And it took, it took so long to hear it. And it was profound. We became really, really close friends after that. From his own words, knew nothing about sexual violence or any of the impact or any of that, how common it was. And for his senior project, he had to pick something to do, and he went above and beyond, and he printed out flyers from the No More campaign and put them around our school with statistics about sexual violence, about how relevant it was, how common it was, how it can happen to anybody you know, how it can be done by anybody you know and respect. And he told me he did it for me, and it was the most moving thing that anybody did for me to this day in the aftermath of anything. And it was really, really deeply profound for me.
Absolutely.
Yeah. He went to Temple that fall afterwards, and I came to visit him my junior year of high school because he became my best friend. And I just knew I had to be at whatever school he was. I couldn't be anywhere else because he was the only person besides my mom I really trusted. And if he was happy at Temple, then I knew I would be. And I think following him was the best decision I ever made. And together, he helped me start my student organization here. And we're still very close friends. He still lives in Philly, right by me now. He's just an incredible person.
I'm really happy to hear that. I'm glad you've got that support still going on.
Yeah.
But that actually leads me to my next question. Help us understand how you started your healing process and that healing journey and where you are in that journey now, and how are things for you at Temple?
Yeah. I think traditional therapy really wasn't helpful for me in the way that most people feel it will be. And it works for a lot of people, but I gave it many, many years, but it wasn't working for me and making me feel desensitized. And I think activism is really where I started to feel better. And I started telling my story to help other people and in a public setting. And it got just more and more comfortable in doing things like this. It's just easier and it doesn't feel as activating as it used to. It just feels like it was so long ago. And the more I research and the more I learn and the more work I do, the more empathy I have for perpetrators because I know they're usually victimized themselves. And I know my perpetrator was, and I feel for him. He experienced what I experienced. So on a level, we can relate in a messed up way. I think connection and empathy are what have led to me being able to heal.
Are you still receiving those same types of hate messages, name calling from some of that same group?
I hadn't for 2 years until 2 weeks ago.
Wow.
And it wasn't anything that bad. It was just a message from one of his friends. And I deleted it before I could even finish reading it. And I blocked the account. I just don't want to think about that period of my life unless it's to feel better about it. So I block out all of the new negatives and I just try to only think about it to work through it. And that's not helpful. So I'm someone who, when someone's talking about what happened in the past, and it's not in a productive capacity, I shut it down. I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to hear someone from my high school I was friends with is saying something about it. I don't care to.
So understandable and commendable too that you were taking care of yourself that way. Is there some sort of protective order or restraining order in place from him having contact with you?
No, never became a legal matter.
How do you maintain not having contact with him?
I think he doesn't want to reach me. I don't want to reach him, and that's worked for us so far. I do get really paranoid when I go home to visit family. I know what college he goes to, and I try to avoid areas that I know he lives and that he's lived. I don't know where he lives now when he goes home. I don't know if they've moved, but I haven't seen him since I went home summer after freshman year. I did glimpse him, and I glimpsed people from our high school, and I still feel that all of the trauma he caused is almost attached to them. I just try to avoid all of the areas I see anybody, which is not fair, but what I have to do, I think.
Oh, yeah. At a minimum, I think what you're doing is amazing. And that you're, again, even able to talk about it this way with me. I don't bring that up for the purpose of trying to cause you any distress or activation of any of that trauma. I bring it up because I think the listeners of this show who are going through very similar experiences or have gone through something similar are gaining an immense amount of support and knowledge by you talking the way you're talking. And I just want to say thank you for being here. Are you able to tell me what it feels like to be able to have a platform where you can tell your story?
It feels really amazing to be able to connect with other people and just know that everyone who's listening has a story, if not someone they know does. Knowing that now is as morbid as it is also comforting because there was really that feeling of isolation for me that was really present.
Absolutely.
I think for me, when I learned that I wasn't alone, that was a really powerful thing. I am really grateful I can be that voice for people. At the same time, there's this level of immunity that I thought came with what I was doing on my campus. And I thought people would be more careful around me almost. I think I got a little too caught up in that. But I think activists and people who talk about sexual violence are still vulnerable. I was raped last year in March at a party, and that was a big setback for me. And I think, that's a big part of why I've actually been able to distance myself from what happened in my past, because it feels like there's something a lot fresher to focus on. But at the same time, I'm doing all of this stuff and going 100 miles per hour. I think I finally, over the past few months, been able to realize that I have to work through it still. Activism is the way that I heal. I've just had to realize that at the same time, it doesn't make me immune from being a human being, and it doesn't make me safe. And I can't act like that because we still live in a world where it's possible and it can happen to anybody and it can happen multiple times. And that was a hard thing to accept. It was a lot easier to work through at this time because I have this network of 500 people on my campus who have been there. And some of them have been there multiple times. And I live in a house of activists at my school. It was so much safer for me to heal this time.
Again, I'm so sorry for that experience.
Thank you.
What does your future look like? What do you hold in terms of hope and dreams and desires?
I want to do this with my life. This is what I feel like I was meant to do. Again, as upsetting as it is that all of these things happen to me, I really do feel like they happened to me because this is where I was meant to end up. And I think it's really hard to do this work without a personal understanding of what it's like. As unfortunate as it is that burden falls usually on survivors to advocate for themselves, it's important as well because it's something that requires a lot of empathy and a lot of personal anecdotes to get through. This is what I want to be doing. I want to go to law school, but I want to work beforehand. I'm part of all of these amazing communities, and I'm working at Callisto and I'm working at It's On Us. And I'm so grateful to be working for those organizations. And I'd like to continue working. God, I wish I could work for both of them full time. I love them both so much. So I would just like to continue working a little bit after school and then go to law school. And then I want to do legislative work and change the way that we address sexual assault in this country.
I love that. I think that's a testament to your strength and fortitude and your resilience. I'm so honored to have the privilege of talking to you and having you be so open. It means the world to me, and I know it means so much to my listening audience. Thank you. Ray, what will you do when we hang up, when we're done talking, to take care of yourself for the rest of today and on into tomorrow and the next day? Because, this is going to have an impact. And you knew that coming in, and you know that every time you've told your story. But tell me what you do to take care of yourself after all of this is brought right back up.
Well, like I said, for me, healing is activism. So I'm going to get back to work. And that's what I want to do. And that's definitely not the right answer for everyone. I recognize that. I think my roommates probably outside of my door would call me crazy for that. But they know that that's what I do. And that's how I operate. So after this, I'm going to go write a speech. And then I'm going to write a paper. And then I'm going to make some Instagram graphics for my org. And that's my day.
That's amazing.
And I'm going to be fine.
I feel very confident that you're going to be fine. Just hearing the way you're talking about this and knowing what you've been through and the fact that you've been on a podcast before and that you do use your voice to make people aware through student activists against sexual assault. You said that there's like 500 people you are involved with in that organization. Is it that strong on the campus of Temple University?
Yes, we have 500 student members, which is insane to say.
Well, congratulations. The best to you in all that you do. I would really appreciate the opportunity of staying in touch with you and being able to report back to you the impact that this episode is having on the listeners as they report back to me. Is there a way for listeners to get a hold of you if they want to help you even remotely from wherever they are?
Absolutely. I would love that. If you're on Instagram, you can direct message my student organization. I run the Instagram, so I'll get your message. The Instagram username is TU_SAASA.
Ray, I can't thank you enough. This has been amazing.
Yeah, this has been really cathartic for me. Thank you.
I'm happy to hear that. And I'm also thrilled that I have the opportunity of putting this out for everyone. Let me ask you if you could give up just a little bit of a plug for Callisto and how you found Callisto. And could you make the SAS audience aware of what you're doing with Callisto and how Callisto helped you?
Yes, absolutely. I'm always happy to plug Callisto. So I was starting my student organization. I had no idea what I was supposed to do. And I literally found myself Googling what to do at a sexual assault club on a college campus. And that is how I found Callisto. Callisto was one of the first things that popped up. And I found out it was an encrypted matching system for survivors of sexual violence to find out if their perpetrators were harming other survivors without it being a public registry. And it was anonymous, which is a really, really powerful thing.
Right.
And it's something that I've seen my generation try to recreate in a lot of ways unsuccessfully. A lot of Gen Z high schoolers, they create these quote unquote anonymous Instagrams where you can direct message your story, but your name is attached to it. You don't know who's running that account. So somebody has your name. And then they post it anonymously, again, quote unquote, anonymously, but you're name dropping your perpetrator publicly. So it was just something that everyone so clearly wanted to build, but no one had the capacity to. But Callisto did it. And I remember when I read about what they did, I started bawling. That is something I was so desperate for because I knew it would happen again, because this behavior was never checked by an adult and he was being emboldened and rewarded for being accused and made popular. And I just knew it would happen again. So I found Callisto and I was like, I know someone else will be out there. Maybe it's not right now. Maybe it's someday, but we're both on college campuses and there's survivors at his campus that will now have access to this tool. So I connected with this sexual assault group on his campus and I made sure that they had Callisto ambassadors as well. And I became one. Now both of our campuses are promoting Callisto as a tool. And I know that the man who assaulted me this past March, I know that he's assaulted 5 other women. So Callisto is a powerful tool. Yeah. It's really, really powerful.
For sure.
And I think it is the ultimate key to preventing serial perpetration and overall ending sexual assault on college campuses as we know it. So I think if listeners take away one thing from this, I would rather it be than anything to tell one person about Callisto every single week, because that is how we stop sexual assault. And that's how we stop it young. And that's how we stop it from going off into the real world before they graduate.
Absolutely. I am right behind that. I am so thrilled that you have said what you've said and that I get to put this out to the world.
I'm happy that you will too.
I think it's awesome. Ray, I'm going to ask you sometime down the road to come back and talk to us again.
Oh, I'd love to.
Oh, great. That's good news. Thank you so much. Appreciate you so deeply, and I'm thrilled again that you agreed to be on the show. So thank you for being with us, and I look forward to our next conversations.
I really look forward to staying in touch, and I look forward to seeing where I'm at when I'm next year, because it's a very fun age where I have no idea where I'll be.
Thanks, Ray. I'll be in touch for sure.
All right.
We'll talk to you later.
Bye.
That does it for another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories. I want to give my heartfelt gratitude to Ray Epstein for being with me on this episode and for her courage in telling her remarkable survivor story. I also want to give her a huge shout out for all she's done and continues to do in her fight to help bring justice to victims and survivors of rape and sexual assault. Do me a big favor, write to me at my email address or to Ray by DMing her Instagram account to let us know how remarkable you think she is for having the courage to tell her story and for all she's doing to help end sexual assault and rape through her efforts through SASA and Callisto. We would greatly appreciate hearing from you. You can find my email address in the notes of this episode. And please subscribe to this podcast and leave a rating. It all helps the podcast grow. I'd also like to thank you again for being a listener of this podcast and to point out that April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. SAS encourages you to do your part to help bring justice to victims and survivors of rape and sexual assault. One of the best ways you can do this is to start by believing, because we all know someone who's been affected by rape or sexual assault. We'll see you next week.